There is a lake in western Minnesota that was named for the sound it makes. French-speaking fur traders heard the Dakota name for this water and translated it directly, Lac qui Parle, the lake that speaks. What spoke was birds, tens of thousands of them, geese and swans whose voices rolled across the water like a crowd in a stadium. This afternoon we are walking its shoreline in the strangest winter Minnesota has ever recorded. Come along, because this quiet-looking reservoir has one of the best stories in the state. We are in the far west of Minnesota, out where the prairie begins to tilt toward the Dakotas. Lac qui Parle State Park sits near the little town of Watson in Chippewa County, along the upper valley of the Minnesota River. The lake stretches about 10 miles from near Appleton down to a dam a few miles west of Watson. 3 counties touch this water, and one of them, Lac qui Parle County, is named for it. The Twin Cities are more than 2 hours behind us, and out here the sky feels twice as large. The Dakota called this water Mdee, and the usual translation is the lake that speaks. It is not a poetic invention, it is a field observation. This is one of the great migration waters of the continent, and in spring and fall the chatter of geese carries for miles across the flat valley. French traders working the river in the 1700s and 1800s kept the meaning and simply changed the language. Very few places in America wear a name that is really a description of a sound. Walk here in migration season, and the lake still introduces itself. To understand this valley, you have to go back about 11,700 years. As the last ice sheet melted, an enormous meltwater lake called Glacial Lake Agassiz spread across the Red River country to the north, larger than all the Great Lakes combined. Near present-day Browns Valley, the lake broke through a ridge of glacial debris called the Big Stone Moraine. The escaping water became Glacial River Warren, a torrent that ran for roughly 2,300 years. It carved a trench up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep, and that trench is the Minnesota River Valley we are standing in. Geologists have a wonderful term for what happens next. They call the modern Minnesota a misfit stream. Today's river occupies only a small ribbon of the giant bed that River Warren cut. Stand on the valley rim anywhere along here, and you can read the mismatch yourself, a modest prairie river wandering across a floor built for a monster. When the river reaches this stretch, it relaxes and spreads into natural widenings. Lac qui Parle is one of them, a place where the valley floor holds the water like a shallow bowl. So Lac qui Parle is not a kettle lake or a pothole. It is the Minnesota River itself grown wide. The river flows in at the head of the lake and out at the foot, the same water passing through on its way to the Mississippi. Upstream sits a second widening called Marsh Lake, and together they form a chain of river lakes in the old glacial trench. 4 river systems feed this stretch of valley: the Minnesota headwaters, the Pomme de Terre, the Lac qui Parle, and the Chippewa. All that gathered water is why the birds come, and why people have gathered here for a very long time. Now notice the date on this footage, early February, and notice what is missing. The winter of 2023 to 2024 was the warmest ever recorded in Minnesota, a season people here took to calling the lost winter. Snow barely came, lakes froze late and thin, and February afternoons felt like late March. For a state that builds its identity on hard winters, it was genuinely disorienting. It made for easy walking on this trail, and a strange, brown, open stillness that longtime Minnesotans found hard to recognize. The park we are walking through is a child of the Great Depression. In 1936, the state launched a flood control project on this stretch of the Minnesota River, built with labor from the Federal Works Progress Administration. Crews of relief workers moved earth, poured concrete, and raised structures through the late 1930s. By 1939, the main water control works were complete, and the Army Corps of Engineers finished the system in the years that followed. The goal was practical: tame the floods and steady the water, but the side effects created everything you see here today. At the foot of the lake stands the dam itself, known today as the Churchill Dam, first constructed under the WPA in 1939 and rebuilt in 1996. It raised and steadied the level of Lac qui Parle, turning a marshy river widening into the long reservoir we see now. Near the dam, the Lac qui Parle River comes in from the west to join the Minnesota. Flood control here was never about one wall of concrete. It is a whole system of structures spread along the valley. And in a nice piece of foreshadowing, steadier water turned out to be exactly what migrating waterfowl wanted. The trail leads us through classic river bottom forest, the kind of woods that only grows where floods are part of life. Cottonwoods, silver maples, and ash stand in the soft ground, trees that tolerate wet feet better than almost anything else on the prairie. In summer, this understory is thick and green. In February, you can see clear through the gray columns to the water. The park keeps a floodplain forest loop among its roughly 7 miles of trails. Out on the open prairie, a forest like this is precious, and it exists only because the river keeps feeding it. This park holds a quiet celebrity, the largest recorded cottonwood tree in Minnesota. Cottonwoods are the giants of prairie rivers, fast-growing, deeply rooted in the floodplain, with bark furrowed like plowed ground. The big ones can put on more than 100 feet of height and live well over a century. Settlers prized them because on the open prairie, a cottonwood was shade, landmark, and lumber all at once. Finding the state champion here, in a river bend park in Chippewa County, feels exactly right. In February, the lake that speaks mostly holds its tongue. The great flocks are far to the south, and the water is left to the wind and the light. In a normal year, this would be a solid white plain dotted with fish houses, and this lake draws serious fishing pressure, up to 150,000 angler hours in a good year. In the lost winter, the ice ran late and thin, and the season looked very different. There is a particular kind of silence out here that only a big flat water in winter can make. Here is the number that made this place famous. In the 1950s, only a few hundred Canada geese stopped at Lac qui Parle in migration. Then the refuge took hold, and the counts climbed year after year until they passed 150,000 birds by the mid-1980s. For the next 20 years, the fall peak ran between 120 and 150,000 geese on and around this one lake. People drove from all over the upper Midwest just to watch the evening flights come off the water. When a flock that size rises at once, witnesses say you feel the sound in your chest. The nearest town leaned all the way into this spectacle. Watson, population under 200, calls itself the Goose capital of the USA. It began as a railroad town, platted in 1879 when the tracks arrived, and it took its name from the local farmer's elevator. For decades, the goose migration brought hunters, birders, and their wallets through town every fall. Out here on the prairie, a town takes its fame where it finds it, and Watson found its fame in the sky. As we walk, almost everything in view is managed for wildlife in one way or another. The state park is the small, people-friendly corner of a much larger system of refuge and public hunting land wrapped around the lakes. In fall, parts of that system close entirely, so the birds can rest and feed undisturbed. That simple idea, give the flocks a safe roost and the food nearby, is what turned a few hundred geese into 150,000. It is one of the clearest demonstrations in Minnesota that habitat decisions work. There is an honest postscript to the Goose story. Starting around 2008, the great counts began to slide, and in recent years the fall peak has run closer to 11 to 20,000 birds. The geese did not vanish. The continent changed around them. Milder winters, more open water, and endless harvested grain fields mean many flocks now linger farther north or scatter more widely instead of funneling into one refuge. The lost winter we are walking through is part of that same shift. The lake still speaks each fall, just not as loudly as it did in 1985. The legal architecture here is worth a moment. In 1957, the state transferred nearly 23,000 acres of the old flood control project to the Conservation Department for Wildlife. In July of 1958, the Lac qui Parle State Game Refuge was formally established, and the state park followed in 1959. Today, the wildlife management area covers roughly 33,000 acres, while the park proper is a compact 530 acres at the foot of the lake. One Depression-era engineering project quietly became one of the great wildlife complexes of the state. February light on the prairie is its own reward for coming out. The sun stays low all day, and by late afternoon everything goes gold and long-shadowed. With the trees bare, you can see the bones of the landscape, the flat valley floor, the distant rim, the water lying in its glacial trench. We started this walk around 4:30, and the light is already leaning hard toward evening. Photographers talk about golden hour. Out here in winter, it is more like a golden afternoon. Geese are the headliners, but the full cast is enormous. More than 250 bird species have been documented around this lake. Tundra swans pass through on their long run between the Arctic coast and Chesapeake country, big white birds with a call like distant bells. American white pelicans, among the largest birds on the continent, cruise the lake in summer squadrons. Add herons, egrets, terns, shorebirds, and clouds of songbirds moving through the valley. If you keep a bird list, this corner of Minnesota is a place to fill pages. Bald eagles are on that list too, and winter is a fine time to look for them. Eagles winter as far north as they can find open water and food, and moving water below dams is a classic gathering place. In a mild year like this one, with the river running dark and open, they range the whole valley. It is easy to forget how rare this sight once was. Eagles were nearly gone from the lower 48 within living memory. Now a February walk on the Minnesota River can include that unmistakable white head patrolling the channel. There is an easy rhythm to this trail: flat ground, big sky, the lake always off one shoulder. The park sits at the meeting point of woods and prairie, so a single loop moves you through floodplain forest, oak edge, and open grass. In summer, these campgrounds fill with families and anglers. In February, we have the whole shoreline to ourselves. Walking here, you understand why the WPA planners put the recreation ground at the foot of the lake. It is simply the best seat in the valley. Near Watson, the valley hides a clever piece of plumbing. The Chippewa River, draining more than 2,000 square miles of prairie, approaches the Minnesota from the northeast. In high water, a diversion structure near town can send Chippewa floodwater sideways through a marshy old channel called the Watson Sag, straight into Lac qui Parle Lake. The Sag itself is a leftover arm of the glacial drainage, so the engineers were reusing a channel the Ice Age built for them. It is flood control by borrowed geography, and it is still operated by the Army Corps today. Down in the bottoms, you can read the flood history in the ground itself. Sloughs and backwaters curl through the grass, old channels the river uses whenever it runs high. The soil here is river gift, silt laid down flood by flood for thousands of years, which is why the surrounding valley farms are so productive. In winter, the marsh grass stands bleached and stiff, hissing when the wind combs through it. Every step here is on land the river made and still occasionally reclaims. One brief story from the lakeshore reaches back before the park. In 1835, missionaries invited by the fur trader Joseph Renville founded the Lac qui Parle mission near the foot of the lake. Renville was of Dakota and French descent, and working together, he and the missionaries produced the first Dakota alphabet and dictionary, and translated parts of the Bible into the Dakota language for the first time. The mission operated for nearly 20 years before closing in 1854. A chapel rebuilt by the WPA in 1942 still marks the site, just up the road from where we are walking. The WPA left the park more than a dam, it left architecture. The historic buildings here, a shelter, a kitchen building, and a sanitation building, were raised in the rustic style the federal relief programs made famous, simple, sturdy, built from local material. In 1991, the whole group was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The oddest treasure is inside the so-called model shelter, which houses a reinforced concrete relief map of the entire flood control system. Depression-era workers literally sculpted their project in miniature so visitors could understand it. Back under the big trees, it is worth pausing to appreciate winter walking for what it is. No insects, no crowds, no green curtain hiding the view, just architecture, gray columns holding up a pale sky. Deer trails thread everywhere through the bottoms, and the bark of the old cottonwoods is furrowed deep enough to lose a finger in. Sound travels differently in a leafless forest, drier and farther. A park like this in February is the same land as July, with all the upholstery removed. A few miles north sits Milan, a village of about 400 that calls itself the Norwegian capital of the USA. Its main street leans into Rosenmaling and Scandinavian heritage, and in recent decades, it has welcomed a large Micronesian community, an unexpected braid of cultures on the prairie. This countryside also has a place in American poetry. Robert Bly, who farmed and wrote in this county, set one of his best-loved poems, driving toward the Lac qui Parle River, on these roads. Not many reservoirs in flood control projects can say a famous poem drives toward them. The light is dropping now, and in early February the sun is gone not long after 5. Evening on this lake was the legendary hour in the great Goose years, when the flocks poured back to the roost water in skein after skein against the sunset. Tonight the sky is quieter, but the stage is all still here, the water, the valley, the enormous horizon. Prairie sunsets need no assistance. The flat land gives the sky the whole show. We time our last mile to walk straight into it. Scattered through this valley are surprises much older than any glacier. In places, the river system exposes outcrops of granite bedrock, some of the oldest rock on the continent, worn smooth long before the ice came. Around them survive remnant native prairies with names like Chippewa Prairie and Sleeping Bison, patches of the grassland ocean that once covered everything here. Conservation groups and the state manage these remnants together, along with springs and rare fens. Between ancient stone below and depression concrete above, this one valley holds an enormous stretch of time. Lac qui Parle is a lesson in how tangled nature and engineering can become. A glacial flood carved the valley, a depression work program steadied the water, and wildlife moved into the arrangement in numbers nobody predicted. The refuge idea worked so well it helped rebuild a flyway, and then a changing climate rewrote the birds' schedules again. Nothing here is purely wild and nothing is purely built. It is a negotiation, renewed every season. That, more than any single site, is what you walk away understanding. Our loop comes back along the shore as the gold drains out of the afternoon. It has been a short, easy walk, well under an hour, and that is part of the appeal. This is a park you can absorb at a stroll. Come in late March or April and the sky above this same trail will be ropes of geese and swans, the lake in full voice. Come in February, even a strange snowless February, and you get the whole valley to yourself. Either way, the lake that speaks has something to say. That is Lac qui Parle State Park, a glacial valley, a depression dam, a Champion Cottonwood, and one of the great bird waters of North America, all wrapped around a little lake with a talking name. If your travels ever bring you up the Minnesota River Valley, give this quiet corner an afternoon and try to make it migration season. From the lake that speaks, in the winter that never quite arrived, this has been Fru World Explorer. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.